Hardwax finishes are different than any other traditional finish that you've ever used. I'm going to explain why that is and compare them to traditional finishes. I'm also going to compare several commercial hardwax finishes, trade some tips on how to apply them, and bring our hands over how expensive these are. But then I'm going to show you how you can make your own for a fraction of the cost. Ow. When a mahogany tree grows, the wood grain spirals up around the trunk. And then, every few years, that spiral reverses itself. This creates an intriguing grain pattern, which you can see in this mahogany veneer if I apply the proper finish. This makes it a wonderful test to see how a finish affects the wood grain and its color. So I've applied a different finish to each of these mahogany plywood boards. I've tested 7 different traditional finishes: lacquer, shellac, spar urethane, polyurethane, water-based polyurethane, water-based acrylic, and a wipe-on tung oil with a little urethane added. Actually, this is Rudy's mixture from our video on wipe-on finishes. If you inspect these, you'll see that some finishes show off the subtle differences in grain and color better than others. Rudy's does pretty well. Water-based acrylic, not so much. And this is what we get if we add a hardwax finish to the mix. This, specifically, is General Finishes Hardwax Oil. Color and grain-wise, it's in the middle of all of these, and it has a definite matte finish, very little depth, and no glossy shell. I'm not sure that if I had something with spectacular grain that I wanted to show off, like curly maple or a walnut crotch, that this would be the best choice. But it has some distinct advantages. There is a definite wood look to it and a remarkably pleasant feel. It's also easier to apply and get right than any of these other finishes, including Rudy's. A hardwax finish is a blend of wax, a material that doesn't harden, and other finishing materials such as curing oils or resins, which do. When a traditional finish cures, the solvents evaporate and the resins or oils react with the oxygen in the air, forming a hard chemical matrix. This is what makes the coat or film that covers the wood. This film feels dry to the touch in anywhere from a few hours to a day and can take 2 or more weeks to cure completely. A hardwax finish does not create a film on top of the wood because you wipe away whatever finish does not soak in long before it has a chance to cure. Furthermore, the wax slows down the curing process. It becomes a barrier that limits the amount of oxygen that reaches the curing oils and resins. This describes 1-part hardwax finishes such as Tried and True, Odie's, Binuba, and Osmo. You apply them and let the air do its thing. Because you wipe away the excess, they feel dry to the touch in just a short amount of time. But it still takes longer for them to cure completely than traditional finishes. 2-part hardwax finishes, such as Rubio's or Natura, add a chemical accelerator or catalyst that speeds up the curing process. These finishes need only 1 coat and will cure in about the same amount of time as a traditional finish. There's also a switch hitter in the group. You can use General Finishes Hardwax Oil as a 1-part finish and be patient while it takes up to 30 days to cure, or mix it with an optional hardener and get it to cure in 5 to 7 days. There are 3 distinct aspects that separate hardwax finishes from every other type of wood coating. And the first is that they do not form a translucent film like you saw on many of these mahogany test pieces. Almost every other type of finish builds up on the surface of the wood, and the thickness of these coatings is called depth. Deep finishes can be quite reflective, and this is referred to as gloss. Hardwax finishes do not build up. They have no depth or gloss because you wipe away everything on the surface of the wood. All you get is a slight sheen. And this depends more on how you prepare the surface of the wood than it does the number of coats you apply. We'll get to that later. But the surface of the wood is always right there under your fingertips. And this brings us to the second difference, and what many people think is the most instinctive. The wood surface, when coated with a Hardwax finish, has an extremely pleasant feel. It's hard to describe, but it's silky smooth and woody and just sort of invites you to rub it. And this smoothness is also controlled by how you prepare the surface. I have a theory that the growing popularity of these Hardwax finishes has a lot to do with plastics. In centuries gone by, we used to paint wood surfaces to give them a different color because there was wood everywhere. Today, we are drowning in plastics, and the shiny look of these built-up finishes looks very plasticky. Heck, the waterborne acrylic finishes are plastic. So in this light, the woody look of Hardwax finishes is very refreshing, and the feel is all but addictive. I do worry that because these finishes lack a hard film, they're less durable and they offer less protection. But then, I think not. These finishes originally came to us from the flooring industry. About 30 years ago, the manufacturers of floor coatings began to add wax to make their stuff easier and less time-consuming to apply. These wax-finished floors were super smooth, with no bubbles, no puddles, and no dimples where the dust had settled. In other words, nothing to rub out. You'd think that a floor finish would provide adequate protection for wooden furniture and other wooden projects. But then most flooring installers recommend that you reapply these finishes after a few years. There are a lot of conflicting signposts on protection and durability, and since I only have a few years' experience with these finishes, I can't honestly tell you which of them point in the right direction. The third and most disappointing aspect of these finishes is their price. There is a wide range among all the brands, but they are all significantly higher than traditional finishes. Of the 7 finishes that I gathered for this test, Rubio Monocoat was the most expensive at $6.59 US per ounce. That cost is based on the price of a quart, a volume that most woodworkers would buy. Tried and True was the most reasonable at $2.20 an ounce. But the average for the Hardwax finishes that I gathered for this video is $4.01 per ounce. To give you something to compare these to, I looked up the cost of the 7 finishes that we applied to the mahogany boards. They were 81 cents per ounce. The Hardwax finishes were 5 times that cost. The 2-part accelerated finishes can be even more costly. You have to estimate how much to mix up to cover a project, and once mixed, the finish begins to set. Anything left over will be unusable. This is what I had left over for the mixes for Rubio and Natura. That's $4 or $5 down the drain. Well, these won't go down the drain because they're hardened, but you know what I mean. We asked around to see if we could find out what made these finishes so expensive, and the only answer that we got that didn't sound like marketing hard sell came from an AI source, ChatGPT. Its answer was luxury brand pricing. To be fair, Hardwax finishes provide better coverage because there are fewer solvents. A great deal more of what's in the can ends up on the wood. There are also fewer VOCs, volatile organic compounds, so the finishes are safer and healthier. But this all changes from brand to brand. And every single one of these tell you to wipe on the finish and then wipe off the excess. So not everything in the can ends up on the wood. Well, at least it doesn't end up in the air we breathe. Fortunately, Hardwax finishes have something else to recommend them in spite of their cost. They are extremely easy to apply and almost impossible to screw up. The application method is different from finish to finish. And for the finishes that I applied, I followed them to the letter. But I did find there was a common theme to the overall method. There are 4 steps to applying a traditional finish. You prepare the surface of the wood, you apply the finish to the wood, you level the surface of the cured finish, and then you repeat steps 2 and 3 between each coat, And finally, you finish the finish. You rub it out with mild abrasives to achieve the level of gloss that you're after. That last step can take more effort and skill than the first 3 steps combined. With a Hardwax finish, it's just the opposite. All your effort is up front. And there are just 2 steps. You prepare the surface and apply the finish. There's no need to level the surface between coats, and there's no need to finish the finish, although there is some buffing to be done. Most of your effort goes into surface preparation. You want to make this a great deal smoother than you would ordinarily do for traditional finishes. Most Hardwax manufacturers suggest that you sand to 220 grit, but this may not be the best advice if you want a good sheen. This is one of my test boards. It's comprised of 6 different woods: poplar, walnut, spruce, white oak, maple, and cherry. And each board is divided into 4 areas where I've sanded to 220 grit, 400 grit, 600 grit, and 1000 grit. For all the finishes that I tested, and for all the wood species, without exception, the 220 grit areas were straight matte, as dull as old shoes. There was a huge difference at 400 grit, where the finishes began to take on a pleasant sheen. And that sheen got a little sheenier at 600 grit, and there it stopped. There was almost no difference between 600 grit and 1000. My conclusion is that you need to prep the wood to at least 400 grit, 600 grit for best appearance, and 1000 grit and higher only if you need to satisfy your OCD. You should know that at the superfine grits, you're no longer sanding. The grit is often smaller than the wood cells, and at this point, you're burnishing the wood, packing the grain and the pores with a superfine dust. This limits penetration and bonding, which in turn affects protection and durability. However, there are some things that you can do to restore some of this penetration, and I will explain them as we apply a finish. The first is to raise the grain. After sanding with the last grit, wet the wood surface with a damp cloth and dry it with a heat gun. This swells the burnished fibers and dislodges some of the impacted dust. Give it a light sanding with the last grit used, and then wipe the surface with a tack cloth. If your project has a lot of crevices, blow off the dust with an air gun. By the way, water popping, or raising the grain, also seems to affect the appearance of a Hardwax finish. Here's a Hardwax finish that was applied to the side of a board that hadn't been water popped. And here's the side that was popped. As you can see, there's a little more sheen where the grain has been raised. When you're ready to apply the finish, give it a stir. Like paint, some of the ingredients may have settled. Apply the first coat with a brush or something that isn't woven. You want to avoid rags because they may snag on the wood and because they soak up too much of this expensive finish. I used a foam brush. Let the project sit for some time to let the finish soak in. The instructions will tell you how long to wait. And while you're waiting, here's another thing you can do to help improve the penetration. Warm the finish gently with a heat gun, and I emphasize the word gently. You don't want a lot of heat. All you want to do is melt the wax and lower the viscosity of the finish so that it penetrates more deeply. You don't want to use this heat method on every finish, especially the 2-part variety. The heat may speed up the chemical reaction and interfere with penetration. If you have your doubts, use it on a test piece first before you try it on something near and dear to your heart. After the allotted soak time, wipe off the excess finish and buff. If you're using an accelerated 2-part finish, you're done at this point. If not, wait 12 to 24 hours. Once again, the instructions will define the time between coats, and apply a second coat the same way you did the first. I could go on and apply more coats. I tried that with several of these finishes and found it to be mostly a wasted effort. The second coat noticeably improved the appearance of all the 1-part finishes, but there was no difference after that. Zilch. After applying the last coat, it takes a while for the finish to cure completely, and this varies wildly from finish to finish. The 2-part accelerated finishes can cure in less than a week. The 1-part finishes may take 2 weeks or more. You'll notice that I am handling the wood I have just finished without messing it up. I don't have to carefully balance the test board on my little pizza tables and wait for the finish to dry. I can saw something or sand something without worrying that the dust will ruin my good work. This is another remarkable aspect of Hardwax finishes, and it has to do with the relative molecular size of the ingredients. Wax is composed of massive molecules, and by comparison, linseed oil, tung oil, even urethane are smaller. When you apply a finish, the smaller molecules can penetrate deeper into the wood. The larger ones stay near the surface. As a result, the non-curing wax walls off the oils and the resins while they cure. The wax also reduces the air exchange so that the curable stuff takes longer to form a chemical matrix. But they aren't exposed to your shop environment as they do so. Except for those wooden projects that will contact food, you may be able to enjoy the results of your craftsmanship even before the finish fully cures. Once again, check the instructions. Let's take a look at these test boards to see how these finishes compare. As I said, each of these boards contains 6 species of hardwoods and softwoods, to which I have applied 7 Hardwax finishes. Tried and True, General Finishes Hardwax Oil, Odie's Oil, Osmo Poly X Oil, Bumbershoot's Nuba Wax, Rubio Monocoat plus 2C, and Natura Wood Oil. Most of these boards have 2 coats of finish, except for those boards with the 2-part accelerated finishes, they only have 1. Now you'd expect the boards with 2 coats to look and feel better than those with 1, but this is not necessarily the case. Let's start this comparison by arranging the boards for ease of application. The 2-part finishes were the most difficult, of course. I put Natura at the end because the packaging was difficult to deal with, at least I thought so. The thicker finishes, Nuba and Odie's Oil, were next because they were the most difficult to spread. Tried and True ended up in first position because it was thinner and needed less mixing. Here they are, rearranged for sheen and reflectivity. Rubio was the most reflective, followed by Nuba and Tried and True. Odie's and Osmo's were the least reflective. I also tested them for feel, since this is one of the most attractive things about Hardwax finishes. Rubio and Nuba were at the top. They felt the best. Osmo and Natura were at the bottom. Arrange them for how well they warm the wood, that is, make the color a little darker and a little oranger, and this is what you get. General Finishes and Tried and True were the warmest. If you'd rather the color not change, then Rubio and Osmo are for you. I wish I could arrange these boards to show you the degree of protection, but I just don't have enough experience, nor is there enough information. Water beads up on all of these, but I don't know how long that will last, nor can I tell you how hard one finish is when compared to another. What I can tell you is that if there is a problem, all of these finishes are extremely easy to repair. You simply sand out the blemish and reapply the finish. I also wish that I could arrange these in order of their visual appeal. But not only is that highly subjective, it's almost impossible. As you can see, their visual appearance is very close. The results to all these tests were close. And I have no doubt that if you did them, you'd get different results. However, since you're going to ask me anyway, I do have a favorite. Factoring in cost, ease of application, and versatility, I like Tried and True. It looks good, feels good, and it's suitable for kitchenware, toys, and maybe even dog toys. And they paid me nothing to say that. And they paid me nothing to say this. This isn't necessarily what I would start out with. When we began researching Hardwax oils, Travis and I found that these finishes use commonly available ingredients for the most part. So it's perfectly possible to mix up your own. We decided to develop a recipe. In fact, we split our efforts to develop 2 recipes. I concentrated on making something that was durable, while Travis developed a recipe that is food contact safe-ish. And here are our results. This side of the board is covered with a Hardwax finish that includes some urethane resins. to increase its hardness. The ingredients are beeswax, carnauba, spar urethane, mineral spirits, and boiled linseed oil. I use boiled linseed oil rather than raw to decrease the time that it takes to cure. The other side of the board is treated with a more organic finish made from beeswax, carnauba, tung oil, raw linseed oil, D-limonene, and a bit of vitamin E oil. The E helps extend the shelf life of the mixture. And once it's fully cured, it's food contact safe. Don't worry about making a screen grab to capture those recipes. There's a link in the description. And it's our hope that you'll do some experimenting on your own. If you do, here's some info that you might find helpful. The D-limonene is not a readily available chemical, but you can easily find it online in our affiliate store. It's a reasonably strong solvent made from orange peels, and it smells great, but be sure to wear gloves when handling it. We found that it wasn't as powerful as mineral spirits, but we were able to get an even blend by stirring the mixture continuously as it cooled. We found the stir came in really handy. Beeswax is available in two forms: natural and refined, or white. The natural beeswax warms the wood's color, making it darker and more orangish. The white beeswax makes it less warm. The carnauba wax is much harder than the beeswax, and it increases the sheen that you get from your finish. As I said before, the vitamin E helps extend the shelf life of the mixture, but you only need a gram or two. And I have to repeat that Travis's recipe is only food contact safe after the finish has completely cured, in about 2 weeks. We were cheap. To use this as a dipping sauce, you have to find food-grade versions of all the ingredients. Whatever recipe you use, mix it up in a double boiler on an electric hot plate. No open flames. All of this stuff is flammable. And make sure that you have some good ventilation. The boiler should keep the temperature of the ingredients fairly low. You only need to get them warm enough to melt the beeswax and the carnauba, about 165 degrees Fahrenheit or 74 degrees centigrade. But even at that temperature, you are working at or above the flash point of some of these ingredients. That's the temp at which these liquids can vaporize to form an ignitable mixture in the air. Once again, make sure the room is well ventilated and keep a fire extinguisher handy just in case. If you use vitamin E, add it after the mixture has cooled. Temperatures above 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 degrees centigrade may degrade the vitamin. Let the mixture cool and then apply it like I showed you. Paint it on, warm it with a heat gun, wait 5 or 10 minutes for it to penetrate, wipe off the excess, and buff what remains. Wait 24 hours and add a second coat. How does our stuff compare with the commercial stuff? Well, let me show you. This is General Finishes Hardwax oil. Our stuff, their stuff. Our stuff, their stuff. Cost-wise, our stuff costs between 52 cents and 60 cents an ounce to make. Their stuff costs between $2.20 and $6.59 an ounce to buy. Now, that's a bit misleading. If you have to buy all of these in quarts and pounds, it will currently cost you about $80 US to buy them all. But hey, after you make yourself a few pints, you can always open up a lemonade stand outside and do a little premium brand pricing. Just make sure you have a vendor's license. And if you'd like to study the results of our tests in greater detail, I've put together some high-resolution photos of our test boards in a PDF that you can download either from our website or our store, either one. This includes the recipes for the two finishes that we made in the guise of cutout labels that you can wrap around 1-pint cans. The motto for our brand is right there. You make it yourself. And while you're browsing our store, consider my book, Woodworking Wisdom. It has a great chapter on finishing. And if you'd like even more information, consider my book on finishing, of all things. Both are available in a digital PDF format so they can be easily searched. Please, Like, subscribe, and buy something to keep these videos coming. And, as always, thank you for your kind attention.